Okay, so somebody sent in a question. I can't remember if it was in response to something I said before or not, because it isn't obvious to me. But they were asking about being attached to customary societal values and the role of the Mahasiddhas who often ignored customary societal conduct. He asked about Milarepa's dislike for certain organized monasticism, and then the relation of charnel ground meditation and Western countries. So all that was put into one question. Okay, so basically, they often speak of two paths, the path of the monastic, the path of the yogi. But if you look at it, they aren't two separate paths. His Holiness Dalai Lama has said that most of the 17 great Nalanda masters were also among the great Mahasiddhas. Yeah, so we shouldn't think that being a tantric practitioner and being a monastic are something separate, or contradictory. They aren't at all. It's true some of the Mahasiddhas acted in very unconventional ways, but that was after they learned to adhere to precepts and conventional ways of doing things. In the West, we don't want any precepts and conventional ways of doing things. We like to just be rebellious and flaunt everything to start with. But if you look, the great yogis always, generally started out in a very conventional way, and then through their realizations, their behavior became more unconventional. So you don't start out with unconventional behavior. As far as what he said, Milarepa's dislike for organized monasticism, it wasn't organized monasticism that Milarepa was questioning. What he was questioning was people learning words and concepts but not understanding them and not integrating them in their being. And it so happened that the people who had these were some of the geshis in the monastery. It would be highly unlikely in old Tibet that lay people would have studied the Dharma enough to be stuck in words and concepts. Okay, so this thing of being stuck in words and concepts with no experience is not something that you find only in monastics. You find it in everybody. And here in the West, where lay people are practicing more actively and are much more knowledgeable than they were in old Tibet, then, here I'm talking about the average lay person, not the great yogis. This thing of just knowing words and not knowing the inner meaning in our heart is that anybody can fall into. Okay. And so we have to be careful about that, no matter who we are. But we do have to start out on the level of words and concepts in order to get to the experience. Yeah, because we need to learn Dharma from a teacher. And how do we learn? It's by the teacher explaining us. Explanations, by their nature, are words and concepts. Yeah, so we don't attain realizations by getting bonked on the head or, by getting some kind of magical blessing. Because if the Buddha could have transferred his realizations into us in some kind of magical way without teaching us, he already would have done that. And we already would have been enlightened. Okay? But the chief way the Buddha teaches us is through his speech and through learning. Now, there might be occasionally some person who has done so many previous lifetimes of work and meditation that this lifetime, something, due to some dynamic with a teacher, they gain realizations very quickly. But that's not the standard person, okay? But we always like to think we're the special one, don't we? Okay, in terms of charnel ground meditation and relation to Western countries, we don't really have charnel grounds here. You know, we have forest lawn, which is, you know, beautiful, where you go and have picnics. So, but the idea of a charnel ground in ancient times was so that we don't hide away from death and from our fear of death. So, you know, in our countries, this would mean when relatives are ill, going to help them and being near the dying, being with people when they're dead. You know, in the West, you can't always have access to a mortuary to go in, and people are often fixed up very nicely by the time they're on display. In Thailand, I was able to go in when they did a autopsy, and that was very, very interesting. But the idea of going to the charnel ground to meditate is, first of all, so that we overcome our way of blocking out death. And we can do that here too, just, you know, going to a cemetery and reading all the headstones, you know, and there's people who died who were younger than us. It's a little bit unnerving. And people who maybe only lived 4 or 5 years and died. So, you know, this, the idea of bringing death to our awareness, we can still do by visiting cemeteries. I think in old times, a lot of times they went to the charnel grounds to overcome fear of spirits, because people were often raised with the idea that when somebody died, then they were a spirit who was hovering around the area. And so Asians tend to be quite fearful of spirits. I don't think most of us were raised with that kind of fear of spirits. And I'm not so sure that everybody who dies is hanging around the cemetery either. You know, there could be off in their next rebirth. Okay. So I tried to cover the topics. I'm not sure I got to the real question the person was asking, but I did my best.